Welcome to today's World Language webinar. This webinar is part of our fall series called Implementation of our World Language Essential Standards. Today, we're focusing on Essential Standard number 4 about culture. Today's agenda is coming up on the screen, and you can see that we're going to start with a welcome and overview of NC's High Five and our bridging documents. Some of you are already familiar with those because those were created this summer as we prepared to start this school year. So we're going to go over that and link to that into our focus today, which is implementation of World Language Essential Standard number 4, culture, like I said. We have a special guest presenter today, Mara Cobe, and we'll introduce her a little bit more later on. After her presentation on culture, where we sort of take a deep dive and look at culture and how we can implement that effectively in our classrooms, we're going to talk about some other upcoming professional development, or PD, for world language educators. And then finally, we'll do wrap up and questions. As we get started, as part of the overview, I want to make sure everyone is looking at their control panel and knows all the things that are there for them. You should have on your screen just the slides that we're seeing here, and then to the right of them, or as part of your control panel, who the presenter is and all the pieces of your control panel. So please look there now. Obviously, you probably already know WebEx that we're using this year is accessible online and via app. So whether you're on a computer right now or a smart device, either way you can access our webinar and participate fully in things like our polling questions and chat questions. All participants are on mute for the recording. We are recording this broadcast so that we can post it later on, and it can be a resource for others who weren't able to join us or who want to go back and just look a little bit more closely or listen a little more closely to what we did. We will also have closed captioning on the recording. On your control panel on the side display, you should be able to see who the host or speaker is, usually by initial. Right now I'm speaking, but you're seeing Mara's screen, so you should see that. You'll also see on your control panel that there are polling questions, and those will come up periodically as we broadcast them out, but you'll answer them in your control panel. And then there's a Q&A, or question and answer, that's always available. There should also be a chat bar, and I'm told, if Mara clicks just once more, when you look at those buttons at the bottom of your screen, you will be able to control what's on your control panel much more carefully. So if you look at those 5 little buttons that came up that should be visible on your screen, notice that that middle one that's blue with the question mark, that's your Q&A. And the one right next to that to the right, the black button with the 3 little dots, if you click on that, you should be able to bring up your chat and see some other things. So you can always access that when you need to. Do become familiar with your control panel, because we'll be doing some activities and things throughout. And also, if you have a question, you can always put it in the chat or the Q&A. If you put it in the chat, please make sure that you send it to all panelists, or everyone if you have that option, but certainly all panelists so that we can see it. I know Mara's going to do an activity using the chat box for that purpose. If it's a question that's just more of an individual question or something like that, you can always put it in the Q&A box, and I can see it and respond to you directly. All right. So let's start with a polling question and use that control panel. I always like to ask, why did you join the broadcast today? Basically, what are your goals? What are you hoping to get? Are you hoping to access professional development made specifically for world language educators? Are you wanting to earn 1 contact hour for license renewal? Do you want to gather information to share with your department, your team, your school, or your district? Do you want to learn about resources for this school year? Or do you just need to ask a question about the state standards or policy or something like that? So what I'm going to do is go ahead and launch that poll question. And as I said, you should be able to see that come up in your control panel and immediately start answering. This is a check all that apply. So you can go ahead and give your answers. All right, we got about 10 seconds left. If you haven't put your answer in, now's the time. This is one way, for example, that you show you're participating actively. in our broadcast is by answering our poll questions. All right, let's go ahead and clear that. And then show you the answers so that we can discuss them. So you should see coming up in your control panel the responses. It looks like most people, well over a majority, are here to access professional development made just for world languages. And that is one of the reasons why we do this World Language webinar series, is so you have information that's very relevant and pertinent to what you're doing in the classroom every day with students. We also have people here who are here to learn about resources for this school year, and I'm glad to hear that because there are a lot of things that we can share with you. We want to make sure that you know are available on the website and you can use in your classrooms with students. We also have people here to earn 1 contact hour. That's great too. We always have to keep our licenses renewed. For our 1 contact hour today, your participation is being documented and you'll be sent a certificate attached with an email so that you can document that and share that in your district or school. Do keep in mind, you may have to get approval for professional development just like any conference or meeting you would attend. We also have at least a quarter of you who said you're here to gather information to share with your department, team, school, or district. It's important to note that we post all of the materials from this broadcast, including the recording, but also the slide set and any handouts and things that we've used so that you can use those locally. We also do post them in different formats, so you don't have to recreate anything. You can just download the Google Slides or the PowerPoint slides and use what you need and adapt it. All right, that looks good. Thank you so much for sharing, and we're going to go ahead and move on. So this year, one of the things we're very focused on is making sure that we have our high 5, and we call it our high 5 because there's 5 different things we focus on. This part of our series in the fall looks at our proficiency-based state standards and 5 different things. That's why it's called high 5. Today, of course, we're focusing on number 4, which is using language to investigate culture and interact appropriately. So that's standard number 4, but that's also one of our main components for the high 5. The high 5 creators who put all these materials together for you, including the materials that we use in the July broadcast, as we're all thinking about going back to school remotely and in a hybrid fashion and so forth, are the people you see on the screen. You've been hearing me, Anne-Marie Gunter, at the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction talk. I am your K-12 World Languages consultant at the agency. And with me, of course, is...
Hi, I'm Mara Cobe, and I am the K-12 World Languages Curriculum Specialist for Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools.
And with us today, possibly as participants, but always very important to our team, are Leslie Baldwin at Winston-Salem Forsyth County Schools, Melissa Perez at Durham Public Schools, and Delinda Ramirez-Carter at Wake County Public Schools System. They are all World Language coordinators, and they have helped compile these materials so that we could share them statewide and also that they themselves could use them in their local presentations, just like you can when we post the materials. So this is our high 5 group, and we have created some different things for you to use that we hope you'll find helpful in your work. When we talk about the purposes of our NC's high 5 and our reentry resources, one of the things we're very concerned about this year was that given how we're starting the school year and the fact that we have probably some potential gaps from spring of 2020 and how last school year wrapped up, we wanted to make sure that there were some helps so that you could scaffold content. So when you get with your students again, and you've been with them probably for a couple of weeks now, your students can continue to build their proficiency in language they're learning and not go back and repeat what they may or may not have missed in the spring, but in fact to continue on and build their proficiency. So we want to share those best practices in implementing standards-based curriculum, along with strategies, performance tasks, and examples that you can take right into the classroom. And that's one of the things we're going to talk about today with our culture components. Also, we wanted to share resources with you that you could use locally, whether you were teaching online totally, face-to-face totally, or in some sort of blended or hybrid format in your classroom, which may vary throughout the year during the school year. Part of that is we created what we call bridging documents. And these are documents that look at our different programs and really think about how do we move students across the bridge. So from where they currently are with their target language proficiency, whether that's as they're coming back into classrooms and into the next level of courses, let's say, or wherever they're starting with you this year. We want to move them to where they need to be by the end of the grade level or course that they're in this school year. And so we have these bridging documents for K-12 classical languages like Latin and Ancient Greek. We have them for our K-12 DLI programs that includes dual language immersion as well as heritage language courses like native speaker courses. And then we have them for K-12 modern languages. You're going to notice on the bridging documents that there's some icons and they reference the different communication modes that are standards in our World Language Essential Standards. They also reference the proficiency level that students have. And you can see right now there's one that's a parrot. That's the novice level. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in the chat box links to all of the bridging documents. We want you to go ahead and download those. What I have to share with you are links to those bridging documents in the Google Drive. So if you click on one of those for the one you need, depending on what language or languages you teach or supervise, you go right to there and you can download a copy of each of those for the programs that you need. We are going to be referencing them using the icons for the communication modes as well as talking about the proficiency levels. And these are really good guides because what they show you is what a student can do in each communication mode or for each standard as they move across the different courses or programs that are associated with our K-12 sequences that you see here. So click on maybe just one that you need right now that you want to focus on, and you'll be using that and referencing it and thinking about it, particularly, as I said, with the culture components. The culture ones, by the way, are the ones all the way to the right on the bridging documents that are the light blue icons. All right, so when we talked about our high five, we tied that in with the TEL project. Some of you may be familiar with that already, but the TEL stands for Teacher Effectiveness for Language Learning. It's a national project, and it looks at best practices in world language classrooms and also takes a very careful look at the kinds of things teachers need to pay attention to when we're thinking about teaching students about the communication modes and culture. You see here our high five that we picked out for this fall implementation series. It starts at looking at, how a teacher creates an environment focused on language performance and proficiency. Then we also have 3 that have to do with the learning environment, and these focus on our different standards. So the one you see highlighted at E5 is about the teacher providing opportunities for students to investigate cultural products, practices, and perspectives in order to interact appropriately with others. So again, that's our culture standard, and that's where that comes in. And then the last one, the PF1, has to do with teachers measuring student language growth through performance assessments. As we go through this series, we're going to take a deep dive into all of our state standards. So the ones you see in green, the LE3, 4, and 5, we're going to have webinars that focus specifically on them. If you want to see the whole set from July, the materials from our July broadcast that went over all the high five in a general sense are also available and posted on our webinar series information page. So just a quick overview here. These are our North Carolina World Language Essential Standards. The weave graphic that you saw when you first came up showed our 4 essential standards, which is our communication modes plus culture, and how those weave in with our strands. Today, as I said, we're going to focus on culture, and that's one of our essential standards. And notice that when we talk about culture, we're talking about interacting and investigating. And so I want us to pause for a moment because we always want to think about culture and how we do that in the target language with students and what that means to interact and investigate. And so Mara is going to spend quite a bit of time with you today talking about that.
Thank you so much, Anne-Marie. I'm so excited that we get to kick this off with culture. It's sort of the heart and soul of why we learn a language and learn to communicate with others from those target languages. As Anne-Marie said before, I'm Mara Cobe, and I am the district's coordinator for World Languages for Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools. So let's focus in and break down that LE5, that Learning Environment 5 indicator from TEL. The teacher provides opportunities for students to investigate cultural products, practices, and perspectives in order to interact appropriately with others. And if you really break it down even further, the TEL project takes it a step further and says the teacher facilitates activities that allow students to recognize and understand, first, how their own culture affects their views of other cultures and the perspectives that they and others have. Additionally, it's on the teacher, we should be facilitating activities that allow students to interact with cultural products, practices, and perspectives to contextualize the language tasks. Also, we want to facilitate activities that allow students to use their language skills and their cultural awareness together to interact effectively in a cultural context other than their own. There's that. We want them to use the language, we want them to interact, but we also want them to understand why things are done a certain way, said a certain way, and really, so we need to investigate before we start to interact. Well, as you know, for language, we of course have these proficiency levels from ACTFL. We've got the novice range, intermediate range, advanced range, superior, distinguished, native, etc. And as you may have heard in previous webinars or from other documents from our state, in a K-12 setting, realistically, our students are not going to get beyond the advanced level, even native speakers or immersion students. Once they get beyond 12th grade, of course, they can push into those higher levels. For advanced, intermediate, and novice, there are those sub-levels when we are talking about language proficiency. When we get to talk about culture, we aren't going to break it down quite as much. We also, as these are 3 of our 4 state standards, we have those modes of communication that are so essential. We have the interpersonal, where there's active negotiation of meaning between 2 or more people. Usually that's oral, but it could be real-time instant messaging back and forth in a written form. There's that interpretive listening, viewing, or reading. And then, of course, when we are sharing information through presentational speaking or presentational writing. What I love are these little icons that are borrowed from a particular ACTFL document I will bring up later. But it's nice how you can see that there's 2-way communication here. There's stuff coming into our brain, and then there's stuff coming out from our brain. If we were in a live session, you would have hand gestures to go along with these happy little icons. So a few years ago, the successful ACTFL can-do statements were refreshed and came out and were color-coded with these proficiency benchmarks, performance indicators that are broken out by language functions, and you can see there's a novice range. And of course, for language, we break it down also by those sub-levels. You look at it by the mode of communication and so on. And that's great. We have these ways to sort of quantify and really give specific qualities to measure those proficiency levels, which is so essential here in North Carolina because our state standards are all based on minimum exit proficiency expectations from what students should be able to do. Those bridging documents that Anne-Marie highlighted earlier and shared with you in the chat, those are based on and adapted from these particular successful ACTFL can-do statements. Well, that's for language, but how does that impact what we're doing with culture? We need to keep in mind that language reflects the culture of those who speak it. Culture is that context within which communication occurs, and language proficiency is linked to cultural awareness and understanding. So I'm going to give you an example. One of the languages spoken in Ireland, most predominantly, is English, although there are other languages spoken there. And we speak English. And if somebody from Ireland says that it's a soft day, that's not an expression we necessarily would be familiar with here in North Carolina. And so, you know, if I think of soft, I think of soft and cuddly like a new puppy or a warm blanket. And what the expression actually means in that given context and culture of Ireland is that it is a day where it's drizzly and rainy and soggy and like the ground is soft and squishy. And so even though we know the language and we know those words, we didn't have that cultural perspective to understand. So it's really important that we as language educators are making sure that those perspectives are going to be present as the students are learning how to use the language and those language functions. So what I'd like you to do in the chat, and as Anne-Marie mentioned earlier, you want to find your bars and you want to find the chat. I would like you to pick one of these three examples. So if you pick example A, you're going to put A in the chat and then your piece, or B and then your example, or C and your example. So in the chat, what I'd like you to think about are the cultures that you live or have lived, whether it's a culture or multiple cultures you were brought up with, places you've lived in your lifetime, the culture where you live now. But from one of your cultures, if you could give me one example in the chat, either on the importance of time, you would put A, and then an example about the importance of time in your culture or cultures, and an example of how that plays out, or B, attitudes towards personal space or privacy, or C, celebrations in your culture, perhaps including who, where, when, and things that would be included. So take a couple of minutes, and in the chat, if you would please put A, B, or C, and then give an example from your culture or cultures related to this. So you would give me the letter and then your example of, so I'll give you an example. So if I were to pick A, the importance of time, I grew up in the Midwest, and it was ingrained in me that to be on time meant you had to show up 10 minutes early. And it's taken living in the South for almost 20 years now for me to finally give myself permission to arrive on time rather than 10 minutes early, and not to have a full-blown panic attack if I arrive 1 or 2 minutes late. So I see a couple of them in here. Feel free to add, give you another minute or two to keep typing. There's some really good ones that I'll share out. I don't know if everybody can see these, probably not. I'm seeing a lot of good ones about time. So for example, I see one about spending summers on a dairy farm and having to be up to milk early in the morning and must be on time. I would imagine that the cows were unhappy if you were late. Time is money. All Southern celebrations include food. I like this one about visiting and attitudes towards personal space and privacy. Never drop by unannounced, always call or message first. I'm kind of the same way. Let's see. From Ohio, oh, we've got somebody from Ohio, but the spouse is from the Caribbean. And when everybody met in Florida and they had dinner reservations at 5 o'clock, the family arrived at 6 and did not apologize because that's just how things roll. In Italy, we not only celebrate one's birthday, but also somebody's name day, people who are huggers and non-huggers, and that might impact people who like their personal space or don't like to be touched. I have another one where there isn't a bubble of personal space in the culture from the Middle East. We've got somebody who was an exchange student in Ecuador. Everybody was always so close to me, and I kept trying to back away from people, so they kept moving closer. We've actually done an activity when I've done live sessions where that's set up with different behaviors for people to interact that way. In the hills of Ohio, everybody knows everyone's business. I know that happens in Illinois too. So there's a lot of here. And Gina, thank you for clarifying that your culture is from Lebanon. I appreciate that. Thank you. All right, so we could go on and we could do this all day, but I'm going to go ahead and keep moving. So there is a handout that Anne-Marie is going to put into the chat called The Aspects of Culture. I'm sharing with you on my screen what it looks like in English. The lovely ladies at the Creative Language class, and if you are not familiar with creativelanguageclass.com, you absolutely will want to check out everything that they've created. Although they do a lot of things in Spanish, a lot of their things are adaptable to multiple languages. As a matter of fact, this Aspects of Culture handout, if you see the link on the top of the screen here on the top of the slide, later on if you go check out that link, you can download a PowerPoint that has all of these Aspects of Culture handouts in 7 or 8 languages: Arabic, Chinese, French, German, Italian, Spanish, English, and a blank one to be adapted. So lots of languages. It's awesome. Anyway, so the great thing about this particular handout with the Aspects of Culture is that it's using icons as well as the language and this could be a great scaffolding activity, especially for our novice learners who may not have the language, but they do understand the concepts of what's happening around them when they see a cultural video or watch, or if they listen to a cultural song, or they're looking at an image or whatever. So this might be a great scaffolding tool. Students can certainly circle something when they see a picture that looks like food. Or if they see something that looks like money and they hear that there's something about money, they can absolutely circle these things. So this would be a way to scaffold for your novice learners. For your more intermediate and advanced learners, this might be a good way to help organize their thoughts and capture things as they're watching a video or doing a reading or whatever, to then bridge to another task where they might be doing some more discussion or writing. So what I want you to do is please go ahead and download that handout, whatever, just so that you can take a peek at it. And I'm going to switch over to a video that's in English. And we're going to do that. And hopefully we can get that pulled up. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to play this video for you. And as we're watching the video, I would like you to circle or maybe jot down, if you're just looking at it on a screen, jot down the concepts that you see from the Aspects of Culture handout as we're watching this video in English. Keep in mind, this is something you would normally do in the target language with something with the target language. So it might be a commercial in Spanish or French or whatever. We're doing it in English for the purposes of being understood across all of our programs. So here we go. Okay, so I'm going to try to figure out how to get back to my screen. Anne-Marie, are you still seeing the video, or are you seeing the...
We can still see the video. It's been paused now. Just go and click back on, look at your control panel. You should be able to control it there.
I'm not getting a control panel.
Okay, hang on.
I apologize.
Why don't you go ahead and look at the control buttons you have at the bottom of your screen?
I don't.
Hmm.
Give me a second. I'm going to exit the presentation for just a moment and come back to this. There we go. Let's try again. Okay, there we go.
Okay, great.
I apologize for this.
And as you get started, you've got a question already about what is the title of this film. So go ahead and jump back in.
Absolutely. So the title of that film is Outsourced. If you have not seen it, it is absolutely adorable, but it is very good. It's about this American whose company decides to send him to manage a call center in India, and he's had no cultural competency training whatsoever. And so there are lots and lots of scenes like this in that particular movie. As a matter of fact, there's a website for corporate training where they're actually using 6 different clips from this film. So it's not just me. I'm not the only crazy one who loves this film. All right. So now that we're back, if you would put in the chat anything that you would have circled while watching that clip, and I will see if I can annotate while we're doing so. All right, wow, I see food, family, and community. Let's see if I can capture all that. So food and drink, and family and community, yeah, I'm just gonna circle the icon. Clothing, absolutely, that was something to look at. Celebrations and traditions, absolutely. Activities, yes. But you get the idea. This would be an economy, sure, absolutely. So you get the idea. And I would actually, I'm going to add one more. Language. When they were trying to explain why he shouldn't be using his left hand, they tried to explain that it was unclean. Now, that's English. We speak English, but that's a specific cultural construct and concept in India that we don't necessarily talk about here in the United States. You know, dishes are clean or dishes are dirty. We don't talk about the concept of unclean, whereas in India and the culture in India, that is a concept. So you get the idea. You could do all kinds of springboarding from something like this. You can go ahead and take that lesson, that task in any direction for novice level all the way through advanced. Okay, so you understand why I absolutely love this particular resource. There is another handout that is a simplified version about what I'm going to show you here. So when we talk about culture, a lot of us picture, you know, foods, flags, festivals, you know, it's Fiesta Friday, or, okay, we're taking French, we should read Camus and we should read Voltaire. And yes, yes, but there's so much more to why we should. And a lot of us, even at how we learned a language, we probably learned a lot of the surface culture and didn't focus as much on the deep culture. So communication styles and rules, and this goes along with somebody put expectations in the chat earlier. Absolutely. Something as simple as eye contact. In some cultures, it is considered very disrespectful to look somebody in the eye. We've already talked about the concepts of personal space or touching, but it even goes deeper, handling and displaying of emotion. and different social situations, if it's more formal or less formal, if it's a family event versus business, the way people communicate is going to be different. Notions of courtesy and manners, leadership, modesty, friendship, the concept of self, time, all these different pieces, attitudes towards elders and adolescents. Another big one is cooperation versus competition. I know a lot of teachers get frustrated with, oh, they're sharing work, they're cheating on their assignments, and some cultures, it's a focus on let's all work together to get the task completed versus let's all work individually. That's not how it goes. That's not how we do things. And so that they may be different from our cultural perspectives and so on. But you get the idea. This particular iceberg on the screen I really like a lot. The handout that Anne-Marie will share with you or may have already shared with you is a simplified version that if you are in a hybrid situation or if you are ever face-to-face with your students in the future, it would be a good one. Even though it's in English, it's easily reproducible. Maybe that's part of your 10% to sort of frame the type of concepts you would be doing in culture. All right, so let's talk about interculturality. And you've heard us mention this: products, practices, perspectives. We are really good at teaching about the products. We are good at helping them to see what the practices look like. Where we struggle as language educators is making sure that even at the novice level, we're helping them understand the perspectives, the why, what is valued. And that's really, really important. So if we look at the language directly from ACTFL, of the 5 C's, when we are talking specifically about cultures, the goal is to interact with cultural competence and understanding, and the way we do that is by relating cultural practices to the perspectives or relating cultural products to the perspectives. And it very clearly says from ACTFL, learners use the language to investigate, explain, and reflect on that relationship between the practices or the products and the perspectives of those cultures studied. So we're going to do a polling question here, and Anne-Marie, I think, has that set up. We want to do just sort of a pulse check, make sure that we were paying attention, that the National World Languages Readiness Standards identify 3 key elements for teaching the goal area of cultures. And so if you will just choose what you think is the best answer. Okay, Anne-Marie, how do we see what we have had submitted?
We have about 15 seconds left for people to get their answers in.
Perfect.
And then I will show the results, and you should be able to see those in your control panel where the polling area is.
Thank you.
All right, we are closing out. Thank you for responding to the question. I'm going to go ahead and show those results. Looks like almost everybody picked the right answer, Mara.
Yay!
So our products, practices, and perspectives.
Yes, there are a few, all those other pieces are specific examples of some of those things, or where you would, some of those things are products that would then help us understand the perspectives. But that's exactly right. Our 3 Ps are really important. Okay, so moving on. Also from ACTFL, we have those performance guidelines. Comprehensibility, comprehension, language control, vocabulary, cultural awareness is part of the performance guidelines from ACTFL. How is the student's cultural knowledge reflected in their language use? In addition to, of course, all these other things related to communication, including the communication strategies about maintaining communication, rather than, you know, trying to serve the conversation and it just drops off after it falls on their side of the net, like a volleyball or tennis match. All right. So what we need to know about interculturality. Interculturality is a dynamic living process of active participation in communication that's guided by an awareness and understanding of culture. This is probably one of my favorite little cartoons that I've ever found. We have at an international terminal, it looks like a whole lot of people have arrived for some sort of business meeting. And I'm going to tell you that the guy on the far left with the blue jacket with his hand outstretched to shake somebody's hand is probably an American businessman. And then the Japanese businessman who is extending his card with both hands, as is the polite way to introduce yourself, is not sure why the gentleman hasn't taken his card yet. We have somebody else leaning in to give somebody probably a kiss on the cheek, and somebody else is a little bit overwhelmed and thinks this is a personal space invasion. And so because he's leaned away, the woman leaning in thinks he's unfriendly, and then we have somebody else at the end who's got definitely added space between himself and the other people, and he's not outstretching a hand, and he's not sure what to do. And so this is why we want to make sure that we're not just teaching our students the language and the language functions, but we have to help them understand the practices and the perspectives so that they are interacting appropriately. Absolutely. So this graphic comes from Ruta Coué and Jackie Van Houten, who, when they wrote their standards for South Carolina and Kentucky, included those intercultural standards, which wound up being sort of the rough draft for what is now the Necessful ACTFL can-do statements for intercultural communication. What's really important to focus on is these green circles talk about the language proficiency a student has, let's say in the novice level. And the red circles represent the cultural knowledge. Again, let's look at the novice level. Where that tiny little sliver is that they overlap, that's where they can interact with cultural competence. As they acquire more language and more cultural knowledge, the intercultural interaction piece is going to be bigger because they have more language and culture intertwined at this point. Moving through the advanced levels, the circles, of course, that space becomes bigger and bigger. At the superior level, the circles are almost on top of each other. And for people who are truly in the distinguished or native level of proficiency, those circles are just all on top of each other because their cultural knowledge and their language proficiency feed into each other. So our goal is to help them with that overlap to make sure that those interactions are successful. So let's just briefly look at the Necessful ACTFL can-do statements for intercultural communication. So originally that first draft was looking at investigation of products and practices, the understanding of the perspectives, and then the participation in those interactions. When Necessful ACTFL can-do statements came out, it had two phases. Investigating those products and practices to understand the perspectives. We don't want to separate the perspectives from the other pieces. And then, of course, those prepare us for interacting in another culture. So here is a snapshot of what it looks like at the benchmark and performance indicator level just for those intercultural investigations. So in the novice level, we can identify those products and practices to understand the perspectives. And then as we move students through the intermediate range, our goal is to make sure that they can make comparisons between those products and practices to understand the perspectives. And down at the bottom of that slide, we've included the link that will take you to where you can download the full set. So if that's the investigate part, how on earth are we going to investigate? What do we need to investigate to find those products and practices to understand the perspective? We're probably going to need to use those authentic resources or anything that we would consider a text. And what you need to remember is for interpretive communication, anytime you're interpreting anything that you can take meaning from, you can use all of your 5 senses. So for example, you might smell fresh coffee brewing as you're going past some particular store that has a green emblem. You probably have figured out that you might be near a Starbucks because you were able to smell that coffee. That was the message, the text that was being sent. And then, of course, you will then see the Starbucks logo and you'll know where you are. So anything that you're interpreting, that would be how we want to help our students do those intercultural investigations. So we need to provide those authentic resources and help them dig in. Once we've done those investigations and we want to talk about those interactions, again, in the novice range, we might be at a survival level in some very familiar everyday contexts, but in the intermediate range, we're at a functional level in some familiar contexts. And when we're talking about interactions, we're not just looking at the language, we're also looking at the behavior. So it might be that personal space, it might be the eye contact, it might be how you greet somebody, whether it's shaking a hand or a kiss on the cheek, or obviously in these pandemic times, all of that may be out the window, but we know what it traditionally has been. Again, same link that Anne-Marie shared in the chat, I also have at the bottom of these slides. And then just so you know, they break down these indicators and give lots and lots of examples. So they'll give an investigate example that might say, in my own and other cultures, I can identify locations to buy something and how culture affects where people shop. And then the interaction can do statement that would be related to it is, I can use rehearsed behaviors when shopping in a familiar type of store. So for example, if you're studying French and you may have learned that when you count on your fingers in French, you count starting number 1 with your thumb and not your index finger. So that when you go into, let's say, a pâtisserie in France and you want to order 1 croissant, you would hold up your thumb, you would not hold up your index finger because they might give you 2. So those are some of those things where you teach them the rehearsed behaviors for the interactions as they're also learning those language pieces. All right, so we're going to try this with an audio clip. So a couple of things, and I realize that we're getting short on time, so I'll go through this as quickly as we can, but still give you a taste of how this works. Anytime you have an authentic resource, you should treat it as any sort of text. So if it were printed words on paper and somebody said, let's use close reading strategies, that sounds like a no-brainer. But why not apply those strategies with an audio clip? So for example, the first time you do a close reading, it's very surface level. You just want them to pick up 1 or 2 pieces of information. In this case, what is happening and where is this happening? Not a lot of details, no explanation given, just what is happening and where is happening. The second time, you would then go back and do a second level close reading, or in this case, close listening. And that's where you start to cite evidence from the text to listen for, in this case, what words or expressions that you hear that tell you what is happening, what is that evidence to really back up your claim that you think this is going on, and then what other elements of the audio in this case might tell you where this is happening. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually give you a chance, we hope. We're going to go ahead and I'm going to play the audio clip. And I want you in the chat, just tell me 1 word or phrase of what is happening and where it's happening. No explanations why, just what and where. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to play the audio clip. And here we go. Okay. So I have lost my ability to see the chat. That's okay. There it is. All right, so I see football game and stadium, sporting event, American football. Okay, perfect. That's all I'm looking for. Some people give me specific in a stadium and an arena. That's exactly what we're looking for. Okay, so I'm going to play it one more time. This time in the chat, if you could please cite something that you specifically hear, words or sounds or anything else that would help you, would really prove that you think this is a football game at a stadium. So we're going to play it one more time. Perfect. So I'm seeing things like touchdown, NFL, cheering, applause, new NFL. You get the idea. All right. So we can probably say together. Let me go back to where I was. There it is. So we can probably say that this is some sort of football game. It is when Dan Marino broke a touchdown record, absolutely. We heard all kinds of evidence in the clip. So let's go and see what would we do if this were a third task, another piece of the intercultural investigation. This could be interpretive and presentational together. You'll notice that the text for this one is in green, whereas the previous two tasks were in blue. That's because with those necessful, actful, can-do statements, blue is novice range and green is intermediate. The other piece to notice that I didn't highlight, we would be doing this again in the target language. We would be asking the students to do this in the target language, which is why we're providing those sentence frames or starters. And you would give them the language to be able to say, I agree or I disagree. Now, task number 3, being a little bit more on the intermediate range, why is this audio clip important? Provide details to support your opinion. We're not going to have time to put those in the chat, but this really gets at those perspectives. This is football, you know, so you would want to, they might talk about how NFL football, American football is really important, that breaking records is important, and, you know, and that could lead into all kinds of discussions. So after you've done your close reading past 1, your close reading past 2, and another task 3 still based on this same clip, you're ready for, even though it's simulated, you're ready for an intercultural interaction, which is going to be an interpersonal task. So you would have them with a partner. A novice level task might be that they would exchange information with each other about their favorite sports and explain why it's their favorite and maybe ask a couple questions. If it's a novice level, or if it's an intermediate level task, they might have more language and they would compare important sporting events, maybe from their own cultures or other cultures, and decide which one they both want to attend. So you might have them actually looking at a schedule of different sporting events for a country that they might be visiting or so on. All right, so you can do this with audio, even though there's no visual. What happens if it's just visual? So again, you can do close reading even with an image. This could be a famous painting. In this case, it's not. It's an actual photo. So we're not going to do task 1 and 2 because we already did something very similar, but just Again, that first pass, that first close reading task, an intercultural investigation, what is happening? So I would ask my partner, what is happening? And then they would say, I think that a celebration is happening. Where is this happening? I think that this is happening at a restaurant, a ballroom. It doesn't look like a house necessarily. Who is participating? I think that family members are participating. And then you would have them go back, and again, in the target language, what do you see that tells you what is happening? So I see people dressed up in nice clothing. I see that some are dressed in traditional clothing and some are in more modern clothing. I see a tray that looks like where you would put dirty dishes and glasses. I see tables with candles. I see what looks like a dance floor. What other elements tell you who is participating? It looks like we have some younger people and maybe some older people that could be parents, that type of thing. So let's jump to task 3, the one that's a little bit deeper. And looking at this image, please put in the chat, what is valued by the people in this text? In this case, it's an image. And provide details from what you see in the image to tell me what you think is happening in this image, in this photo. So go ahead and put those in the chat. Oh, wow. I'm seeing some good stuff. So let me tell you what I'm seeing. I'm seeing people think it's a wedding. Traditions and customs are valued. It looks like serving others is valued. Formal clothing is valued, as is the color red. Looks like a tea ceremony, a value of tradition. Presenting gifts to newlyweds, perhaps. Style of greeting is important. There's some bowing, it looks like. It looks like a wedding ceremony in China. The younger couple is wearing red. The older couple might be receiving a gift. Respect for elders. Manners are valued. So fantastic. This is fantastic. This is exactly what we're looking for. And so this could be a brainstorming task, and then you could then do a writing task or a formal spoken presentation task with your students. Then, of course, the next task, which we obviously are not going to have time to do through a webinar, an unscripted role play. You would put them in groups of 4, perhaps, and have them take on the role of somebody in the image, and they would role play in the target language what might be happening in the photo. And just to tell you, yes, it is a wedding. It is a Chinese traditional wedding, but it happens to be taking place in Singapore. But it looks like there's some Chinese heritage there. And you're right, for celebrations, red is very much valued, as as respect for elders. Beautiful. All right. So you may remember earlier when we looked at our modes of communication, there were these happy little icons that looked like ears and megaphones and 2 arrows going back and forth. This particular document is now almost an oldie but a goodie, but it is the 21st century skills map that was created by ACTFL several years ago. What is so fantastic about this particular document, especially when you're thinking about culture in the classroom and authentic resources, it's broken by range, novice, intermediate, advanced. It doesn't break it down by sub-level. It has connections to things like health literacy, civic literacy, financial literacy, but it also calls out each of the modes of communication and gives sample tasks where you would do intercultural investigations and then simulated, or could be through virtual exchange or with speakers of the language that are in your building, for example. But here are sample intercultural investigational tasks and interpersonal, those cultural interaction type tasks. And this document is several pages long, broken out by different of the 21st century skills, and just is a great resource to help you think of ideas of what you could do, how they might relate to the units you're already using. So I think this is one of our last polling questions before I turn it over to Anne-Marie. I've got just a couple slides after this.
Our poll is open.
All right. So the teaching of cultures is strengthened when students read, listen to, or view authentic materials. Please pick which one is the best answer to be the definition of what we would call authentic materials.
Ten seconds left. All right. Looks like the majority said all of the above.
Yay. Okay, so we have the gifted group today. That's awesome. All right. So why is it important? Just to give you the context, this is Ariel, the Little Mermaid. While she was still living under the sea, she was given what we know to be a fork, but was told it was for combing her hair. So the first time she is interacting on land, which is a different culture, and she sees a fork at the banquet table, the first thing she does is grab it and start combing through her hair with the fork. And we are trying to make sure that we are not setting our students up for uncomfortable interactions. We want them to be successful with those intercultural interactions. And just a reminder, when we talk about those three modes of communication, that interpersonal, that is what those intercultural interactions are. It's also related back to that mode of communication. And those intercultural investigations, we're going to have to do that interpretive listening, reading, and viewing. In our current time through virtual learning, that tasting and smelling part probably isn't happening. And then, of course, that prepares us to process and create presentational speaking and writing to show what we've learned through our investigation. And so it's great that even though culture we've listed separately in North Carolina, it really is interwoven and touches back on the other three standards we have. So I'm going to switch over to Anne-Marie. Anne-Marie, do you want me to continue sharing or hand everything back over to you?
Actually, if you will just pop out of the slide deck for a minute. Given our time, I'm going to go ahead and wrap us up. There are several slides about upcoming PD, but of course we'll post this information so you can get that and look for that in listservs as well. That will be shared. So if you go ahead and show the slide, Mara, that's at the end that talks about the archives and CEUs, we'll wrap up for today so everyone can get on their way for Wednesday evening.
All right, let me see if I can get there. Get to the which slide?
The next to the last one, slide 52.
Yes, ma'am.
There you go. All right. So as we promised, all of the archives from this broadcast, so everything we just did together, all the slides we used, the examples, the videos, the audio links, the ideas for tasks to use in the classroom with students, all of that will be posted as part of our archives. We will post the recording. We will post the slides in 3 different formats, as Google Slides, as PowerPoint slides, and as PDF slides, in case those are easier for you to see, like on a smart device. We'll also post the handouts and links with that. And some of the slides we had to skip over about upcoming PD, those will be posted too. So there are links to things like our upcoming conferences here in North Carolina with the Flint Conference, as well as the ACTFL Conference, the national one, as well as other professional development that is becoming available as we move through the school year. Also, on the next side there, remember, those of you who are thinking about licensure renewal, Individuals who participate in a live broadcast of one of our webinars can earn one contact hour towards the CEU for licensure renewal. That contact hour will come in the form of an email with an attached certificate, probably about 2 weeks from today. So look for it soon, but not immediately. And then, as always, you may want to check with your district or school about how they approve those kinds of professional development credits. Some districts have a very formal process, others do not. So, all right, well, that's it for today. We thank you for joining us. You can get all of this information, our archives and so forth, on the Professional Development tab on the webinar series information page. And so I've got kind of a visual of where you would find that. Everything, of course, is on our NCDPI World Languages website at bit.ly/NCDPIWL. So that's always there for you. You can always go to that. One thing I will tell you, too, is I will make sure that everybody who attended today is signed up for our listservs, and that way you'll get announcements about webinars like this, as well as resources and upcoming professional development that you may be interested in. You can always contact me, Anne-Marie Gunter, with any questions via email or phone, and I encourage you to do that. It's certainly been a challenging year so far, but I think as all educators, we're excited to get started with our students, and everyone is, I think, getting into a routine, so that's good to know. Mara, we want to thank you so much for sharing with us about culture today, really doing a deep dive. We appreciate it. I saw a lot of comments, by the way, in the Q&A and in the chat saying that people really needed to hear this. They enjoyed what you shared with them, and they're also going to take the archives and take it back and share with others. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It was fun.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and stop our recording.